For over 1800 years, the banned Book of Jubilees slipped quietly out of sight. It spoke of angels and covenants, of creation, retold in careful detail, and of a year not of 365 days, but of 364. It promised a calendar that never drifted, a rhythm of weeks and feasts that always fell into place, like stones in a perfect circle. And yet, somewhere between desert caves and cathedral lamps, that book was whispered about, sidelined, and slowly forgotten by most of the world. If this is true, if there really is a banned Book of Jubilees that claims to preserve a hidden calendar of 364 days, then why did the Church let it slip into the shadows? What was so dangerous, or so inconvenient, about a calendar that never moves? And what might it mean for your own life if time itself was once treated as a sacred covenant between heaven and earth? Before we sink into that mystery together, take a moment to help this story travel further. If you enjoy falling asleep to deep biblical and apocryphal mysteries like this, please subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next night's journey. In the comments, let me know where you are watching from and what time it is right now, where you are. I love seeing this little community stretched across the world in so many time zones. And if this title, The Banned Book of Jubilees, the hidden calendar of 364 days, already stirs something in you, if you feel like you understand the mystery we're about to explore, share this video with someone who would stay up late just to hear why a calendar could be dangerous. In a moment, we will slow everything down. I will invite you to breathe, to unclench your hands, to let your thoughts drift like dust in a shaft of lamplight. But first, I want you to know where this journey will lead. Before the end of this night, you will have walked through the lost calendar of 364 days, listened to the voices who defended it, and felt how your own days might be gently held inside a larger, hidden order. When you are ready, close your eyes, let your body grow heavy, and let us turn the first page together. Imagine a small parchment lying on a low wooden table, its edges darkened by age, its ink softened by centuries of fingers and breath. A candle flame leans toward it, and in the wavering light you see a title written in a script that feels both familiar and distant. The Book of Jubilees. Some in the ancient world called it the Little Genesis, because it told the story of beginnings all over again, but with details that sound like the quiet notes hidden beneath a melody you thought you already knew. While most people turn to the first pages of Genesis to hear how the world began, a smaller circle of readers listened to this other voice, this other telling, and they ordered their days and festivals according to the pattern it described. The Book of Jubilees claims that what you are reading is not simply a human memory. It presents itself as the words of an angel of the presence, spoken to Moses on the mountain when the cloud wrapped the summit and the thunder dimmed into a low, steady hum. History is divided into great cycles, jubilee after jubilee, each one a span of 49 years. Inside each jubilee, weeks and days fit together like the stones of a well-laid wall. Nothing is left loose or drifting. Every birth, every covenant, every journey is placed inside a careful grid of time, as though the centuries were a mosaic laid out before the eyes of heaven. In those pages, time is not a chaotic river, rushing and flooding without pattern. It is more like a garden of paths, each one measured, each one counted, each one watched. The Book of Jubilees speaks of heavenly tablets, vast unseen records on which the years of the world are written with a precision that does not slip. Angels know the number of days between promise and fulfillment. They know which week a covenant will be renewed and which festival will arrive like a familiar friend at the door. Human beings may forget, but in this vision, the calendar of God does not forget. This is where the book begins to sound different from the stories you may already know. For many readers of Scripture, the year is a mixture of lunar cycles and solar seasons. Months swell and shrink. Feasts move from one weekday to another as the years roll by. But in Jubilees, the shape of time is fixed and luminous. The year is always 364 days long. It is divided into 4 equal quarters of 91 days each. 13 weeks in every season. The feasts do not wander. Passover does not slip from one day of the week to another. Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks, rises always on the same step of the stairway of time. To the authors who cherished this book, that stability was not a small detail. It was the sign that the people of the covenant were walking in step with the angels. They looked at a year that never required adjustment and saw in it a reflection of heavenly order. If you always know that a feast will fall on the same day, you can imagine that above you, in realms you cannot see, the songs of angels rise in the same rhythm, year after year, unbroken and unconfused. To them, a drifting calendar was not just an inconvenience. It was a symptom that something had gone wrong, that human beings had lost the beat. You can almost picture a small group in some quiet village. Long ago, meeting at dusk, a teacher unrolls a copy of Jubilees and traces the lines with a careful finger. Outside, the sky deepens toward indigo. Inside, families listen as the pattern of the year is described, week by week, festival by festival. Children learn that the world was not only made, but measured. They hear that from the first day of creation. The light and the darkness were fitted into a schedule known before the foundations of the earth. The children grow drowsy as the teacher recites the spans of years, the count of Jubilees, the sequence of generations, like a lullaby woven of numbers and names. It is easy, lying here tonight, to forget that such a vision ever existed. Most printed Bibles you will see do not include the Book of Jubilees. Many churches never mention it by name. For centuries, it survived in the highlands of Ethiopia, copied in Gs, cherished and read when much of the rest of the world had nearly forgotten that it once shaped the way some believers kept their feasts. Only fragments, hints, and echoes of its calendar remained in other languages, until the modern era began to recover lost manuscripts and scattered leaves that had slept in darkness. Yet the influence of this little Genesis stretches further than its absence from your bookshelf might suggest. The communities who loved the 364-day year carried that love into the desert of Qumran, into scrolls that would not be seen again until the 20th century. They built their identity around a conviction that to change the calendar was to change obedience itself. Time, for them, was not a neutral background. It was part of the covenant, a living frame that held every prayer and every gathering. As you breathe slowly now, in and out, you are lying in a different world, under a different sky, with a different way of counting days. But the question that stirred in their hearts can still stir in yours. If there truly is a pattern to time that reflects the mind of God, what happens when that pattern is lost or ignored? What happens to a people, to a soul, when feasts wander and weeks blur and the sense of sacred rhythm fades into the noise of ordinary schedules? We are only at the threshold of the investigation. For now, you can simply imagine the Book of Jubilees resting on that low table, its pages open, its careful divisions of time stretching out like terraces on a hillside. In the chapters that follow, we will trace its claims back to the very first sunrise, to the moment when light first divided darkness and the days of the world began to move. For tonight, let your body sink a little deeper into stillness as we turn from the readers of this hidden book to the beginnings of time itself. When you close your eyes and let the world go dim, you can almost imagine that first evening before there was an evening. Nothing yet had a name. There were no clocks, no calendars, no tiny numbers shining from a phone beside the bed. There was only deep water, deep darkness, and the quiet attention of the one who was about to speak. In the book of Genesis, the words are simple. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. In the book of Jubilees, that beginning is wrapped in layers of counting. Every act is measured. Every day is a step in a pattern that already exists in the mind of God. The book of Jubilees tells us that when God began to create, he was not improvising. He was moving along a path that could be traced in weeks and jubilees, like a great stairway of time rising out of the sea of nothing. The angel of the presence, speaking to Moses on the mountain, describes how days were written on heavenly tablets before they ever rolled across the sky. When God said, "Let there be light," he was not only dividing brightness from gloom, he was setting the first marker in a long line of evenings and mornings that would follow. The first day is not just a moment. It is the opening note of a song that will always be counted in the same careful rhythm. As light spread over the face of the waters, the Book of Jubilees imagines that even this spreading has its appointed measure. There is a span for the separation of light and darkness, a span for the gathering of waters, a span for the sprouting of plants. Time in this vision is never loose. It never slips from the fingers of its maker. You can lie here now, breathing slowly, and picture each creative act as a stone laid into a wall. Day by day, the wall grows higher, each block cut to the same hidden ratio. God sees the end from the beginning, and the angel tells Moses that every future day of history will mirror these first 7 days in a pattern of weeks, seasons, and jubilees. On the 4th day, when the greater light and the lesser light are set in the sky, Genesis says they are given for signs and for seasons, and for days and years. Jubilees leans in close to this line. It hears more than poetry. It hears structure. The sun will mark a year that does not stagger. The moon will move, but the true rhythm will belong to the fixed path of the sun. In the theology of Jubilees, the year is meant to be steady as the heartbeat of a resting child. 364 days, 4 perfect quarters, 13 weeks in each quarter crowned with a day that completes the cycle. No feast will drift out of place. No appointed time will lose its footing. If you have ever felt the frustration of a schedule that keeps changing, of plans that never quite settle, you can feel a quiet sympathy with this desire. Imagine a world where every sacred gathering comes like the return of a familiar star, always on the same day. In such a world, a child can lie awake the night before a feast and feel, deep in the bones, that heaven itself is turning its face toward the same moment. In the vision of Jubilees, the first week of creation becomes the seed from which every week grows. And the 7th day, blessed and hallowed, becomes the anchor that keeps the year from drifting into chaos. As you listen now, you might begin to feel your own memories settling into a kind of order. You were born in a certain year. You passed through seasons that now blur together when you try to recall them. Yet in the picture offered by Jubilees, each of those seasons had a place. Times of laughter, times of loneliness, unexpected blessings. and long unanswered prayers. All of them could be imagined as resting on lines already drawn. The idea is not meant to press you with fate, but to comfort you with design. You have never lived a day that surprised your Maker. This is part of why the architects of the 364-day year were so fierce in their defense of it. If time is a covenant, then changing the count of days feels like erasing letters from a sacred promise. In their view, to add or subtract at random was to blur the reflection of creation itself. A feast that moves from one weekday to another from year to year does more than confuse travelers and farmers. It suggests that the pattern of heaven can be bent by human preference. Jubilees resists that suggestion. It says, in its own quiet, insistent way, that the order written into the first 7 days was meant to echo unchanged through all generations. Lying here, you are far from the edge of that first sea, far from the garden, far from the mountain where Moses listened to an angel speak of heavenly tablets. But you are not far from the experience of counting. You count hours until rest, days until a task is due, years since a loss or a gift. Your heart keeps its own beat inside your chest, steady and faithful, even while your thoughts wander. The Book of Jubilees invites you to imagine that the universe has a similar steady pulse, measured out not only in stars and seasons, but in weeks and jubilees. Every breath you take now is part of a pattern that began when God first said, "Let there be light." We began this journey by looking at the little Genesis as a strange relic, a lost telling of familiar stories. Here, in the quiet around you, it becomes something more. It becomes a lens through which you can see creation not just as a single event, but as a carefully timed opening movement in a much longer symphony. To understand why later communities clung to a 364-day year, and why others rejected it, we must keep walking along this line of days. From the first sunrise, we will move toward the feasts and appointed times that the Book of Jubilees believed should never drift. In the next chapter, we will step into the circle of the year itself, and trace how each season finds its place in the architecture of holy time. There is a calm that comes when something finally makes sense, when pieces that felt scattered click together with a soft, satisfying sound. The communities who cherished the Book of Jubilees felt that calm not only when they read its stories, but when they looked at their year. To them, the world did not spin on a crooked axis of shifting days. It turned through what they called a perfect year, a circle of 364 days that never stumbled, never needed to be patched or adjusted. If you imagine the year as a great city, they believed it had 4 gates, one in each season, and that every soul who walked through those gates stepped into time that had already been measured and blessed. In this vision, the year is divided into 4 equal quarters. Each quarter holds 3 months. Each month is exactly 30 days long, and after every 3 months comes an extra day, a quiet hinge that completes the count of 91 days, 13 weeks per quarter, 4 quarters per year, 52 weeks in all. You can almost hear the gentle rhythm in the numbers as you lie here. 7 days, again and again, stacked like smooth stones by a river. After 91 days, a gate. After 4 gates, a year. Nothing spills over. Nothing is left dangling in the dark. The Book of Jubilees insists that this pattern is not a clever human invention. It is, in its own words, a law written on the heavenly tablets. Angels know these quarters. They know the first day of each season, and they know the days when feasts are meant to rise like lanterns along the path of the year. In such a world, Passover always comes in the same week. Shavuot always falls on the same day. You could mark them on your heart once and never feel the need to erase and move them. A boy growing up under this calendar might feel as though the year itself were breathing steadily around him. Each festival like an inhale and exhale that never breaks its rhythm. For the keepers of this time, the comfort was more than mathematical. It was devotional. To live inside a 364-day year was to believe that heaven and earth moved together. When they stood under the stars on the night of a feast, they could imagine that, somewhere beyond sight, the same appointed day was being observed by beings who never slept and never lost their place in the song of worship. To change the count of days, then, would be like singing out of tune with a choir you cannot see. The melody might still be lovely to your own ears, but you would know, deep inside, that you were no longer in harmony. You may have felt something like this in your own smaller way. Perhaps there is a habit, a weekly gathering, or a quiet morning practice that, when it stays in place, makes the rest of your life feel more anchored. When it is broken or moved, nothing catastrophic happens, but there is a faint sense of being off beat. As you rest now, feel the rise and fall of your chest. Each breath is a tiny cycle, a miniature season. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. The teachers, shaped by Jubilees, believed the whole year should feel like that, held in a steady pattern that the soul could relax into. This is why the book speaks so sharply about those who corrupt the times and move the feasts. In its pages, there is a quiet grief over calendars that do not match the design. The author warns that generations will come who follow the moon instead of the sun, who let feasts drift from their rightful places. When that happens, he says, people will no longer know the appointed times, and they will stumble in the festivals of the covenant. To modern ears, this might sound like a technical dispute. To them, it was a sign of deeper forgetfulness, a sign that the world was losing its alignment with the order God set from the first week. As the 20th century opened, jars and caves and long-sealed libraries, scholars began to notice something striking. The pattern of 364 days appears not only in the Book of Jubilees, but also in scrolls from a community living in the desert above the Dead Sea. Their writings, preserved in clay and dust, speak of the same quarters, the same fixed feasts, the same conviction that it is the sun, not the moon, that should guide the sacred year. What once seemed like an isolated idea began to look more like the heartbeat of an entire movement. A quiet solar path running beneath the surface of Second Temple Judaism. Lying here now, you can let that realization wash over you like warm water. The hidden calendar was not one author's odd preference. It was, for some, the very spine of faithfulness. They arranged their priestly rotations around it. They planned their harvests by it. They watched the horizon for the turning of seasons with a confidence that the pattern would not betray them. To read the Book of Jubilees with this in mind is to hear not just doctrines about time, but the longing of a people to live in a world where holy things do not slip. The more we trace this longing, the more we can see why later communities, who followed another rhythm, felt a quiet strain. Two calendars cannot both claim the same feast without friction. Sooner or later, one pattern becomes normal, copied and taught, while the other fades toward the margins. Somewhere in that fading, the 364-day year slipped from sight for most of the world. Before we watch that happen, we will visit the desert where this solar time was guarded like a flame in the wind. In the next chapter, we will step into the caves above the Dead Sea, where sealed jars and sleeping scrolls waited for human hands to find them and open the gates of this forgotten year once again. Night has a way of turning the world into a series of small, lit circles. Your room is one circle. Somewhere far away, another pool of light once glowed inside a desert cave, where a shepherd boy reached into the darkness and his fingers brushed cool clay. The hills around the Dead Sea were quiet that day, in 1947. The air dry, the stone warm underfoot. A lost goat had wandered among the cliffs, and in searching for it, the boy tossed a stone into a shadowed opening. Instead of a dull thud, he heard the sharp crack of pottery breaking. That sound, echoing off the cave walls, was the first stir of scrolls that had slept for nearly 2,000 years. As you breathe slowly now, you can imagine him stepping into the cave, eyes adjusting to the gloom, dust tickling his throat. Clay jars stood against the wall like sentinels. Some were still sealed, others were broken, their lids shattered where the stone had struck. Inside them lay rolled bundles of brittle leather and parchment, wrapped for a journey through time no one had planned. The shepherd did not know, could not know, that in his hands he cradled the library of a long-vanished community, a people who had ordered their lives around a very particular vision of the world, the law and the calendar of God. In the years that followed, scholars and locals alike would clamber up to those caves above the Dead Sea. They would lower themselves by ropes, crawl along narrow ledges, and gently lift fragments from the dust. When the first serious examinations began, a pattern emerged. Many of the scrolls came from a group often associated with the Essenes, a community that had withdrawn from Jerusalem to live a stricter, purer life in the wilderness. And among their texts, again and again, was a fierce devotion to a 364-day year. They copied laws, prayers, and priestly schedules that all assumed a fixed solar calendar, so similar in spirit and detail to the one cherished in the Book of Jubilees. When you lie here and picture those caves, you can see more than jars and leather. You can see a people who felt the same uneasy tension that the author of Jubilees describes. In their writings, they speak of other priests and leaders who follow a different calendar, who let the months drift according to the moon, who celebrate festivals on days that, to the desert community, are wrong. They warn that such leaders are changing the times, corrupting the appointed days, and causing the people to stumble. It is as though two melodies were being sung at once, one from the city, one from the caves, and each side believed the other was out of tune. Among the Dead Sea Scrolls, scholars found texts often called the calendrical documents. These writings lay out the year with meticulous care. They list the courses of priests, specifying which families will serve in the temple each week. They mark the feasts, setting Passover, unleavened bread, first fruits, and Shavuot into a grid that never shifts. They echo the same conviction that the year must have exactly 52 weeks, that it must begin on a specific weekday, and that any alteration would break the harmony between heaven and earth. Reading them alongside Jubilees, you begin to hear one continuous voice, stretched across different books and generations, whispering that true obedience includes keeping faith with the structure of time. For a long time, before the jars were opened, modern readers knew the 364-day calendar, mostly from scattered hints in texts like Jubilees and Enoch, preserved in the Ethiopian tradition. Many assumed it was a marginal curiosity. The discovery at Qumran changed that picture. Suddenly, there were multiple manuscripts, written by people who had staked their entire communal life on this pattern. They timed their worship, their festivals, and even their hopes for the future according to a year that matched the architecture we have already traced. The caves bore witness that the hidden calendar was not just an idea on a page. It was a lived reality, a daily rhythm beating in the heart of a desert sect. If you listen closely, beneath the details and the debates, you can sense something tender in this devotion. These were not abstract mathematicians, but farmers, craftsmen, women grinding grain, children learning to read. They watched the same sunrise fall across the cliffs and the Dead Sea, and they believed that each dawn arrived on a day that had been counted before the world began. To rise and pray on the appointed morning of a feast was, for them, an act of deep trust. It meant believing that heaven had turned its face toward that day, that angels and humans were, for a moment, standing under the same invisible banner of time. As you rest, let that image soften the sharpness of the argument. It is easy, at a distance, to see only conflict between calendars, only lines drawn and accusations written in ink. But in the quiet of the night, you can also imagine the comfort these people felt as they stepped into a year that never wobbled under their feet. The 364-day cycle gave them a frame within which to suffer, to rejoice, to wait, even when Rome pressed on their borders or when disputes raged in the wider world. The turning of their seasons stayed the same. In that stability, fragile human hearts found a place to breathe. As you rest, it may comfort you to think of those scrolls not as cold artifacts, but as echoes of human voices. Somewhere in that community, a scribe bent over his work, copying lines about weeks, seasons, and jubilees by the light of a small lamp. His hand moved slowly, carefully, forming each letter with the awareness that time itself was holy. Outside, the stars wheeled over the Dead Sea. Inside, ink dried on parchment, fixing a vision of the year that would outlast the community who cherished it. Centuries later, when the settlement was long gone and the scrolls lay forgotten, the desert kept them in its dry embrace until the world was ready to hear their testimony. With the Dead Sea Scrolls in view, the Book of Jubilees takes on a new weight. It is no longer just a strange, isolated voice. It becomes part of a chorus that includes Enoch, calendrical texts, and priestly lists, all singing of a 364-day year. The caves above the Dead Sea show us that this chorus was once loud enough to shape the daily lives of real people. People who watched the sun rise and set over the same salty waters you are picturing now. To understand why the hidden calendar was eventually set aside, we must now turn from the desert to the wider world, where other leaders, other bishops, and other scribes were deciding which books would be copied, which would be read in churches, and which would slowly disappear from view. When you picture Moses on the mountain, it is easy to imagine only thunder and fire, a scene of noise and power that shakes the stones beneath his feet. The Book of Jubilees invites you to imagine something quieter, and in some ways even more mysterious. It says that on that mountain, in the thick cloud, Moses did not only receive commandments carved in stone, he also listened to an angel of the presence, a radiant messenger who began to dictate the entire history of the world, from creation until the distant future, arranging every event into jubilees and weeks of years. Time itself, in this telling, became part of the revelation, poured into Moses' ears like a slow, steady stream. The angel speaks of heavenly tablets, vast and shining, on which all things are written before they unfold on earth. On these tablets, The days of the world are already numbered. The births of patriarchs, the rise and fall of kingdoms, the years of wandering, the seasons of harvest and famine, the times of obedience and of rebellion, all stand inscribed in a script that does not fade. For the listeners shaped by Jubilees, this was more than a metaphor. It was a way of saying that nothing in history, and nothing in your life, drifts outside the awareness of God. Every year is known in advance. Every Jubilee and every Sabbath has its place on those invisible pages. As you rest, you can imagine those tablets not as cold stone, but as something living, like sheets of light that hold the shadows of future days. Each line is a path that will one day be walked by human feet. The angel, in this vision, is not improvising when he speaks to Moses. He is reading aloud from a record that has always been there. A record that reaches back before the first sunrise and stretches forward into ages you and I cannot see. To hear him speak is to be drawn into a sense that history is not random, that time is not an accident, but a carefully composed narrative. Within that narrative, the 364-day year holds a place of honor. The angel describes the division of days, seasons, and jubilees with the same certainty that he uses to recount the deeds of the patriarchs. He tells Moses which days are appointed for feasts, which weeks belong to which generations, which years will bring rest to the land. He warns that if the people depart from this pattern, if they follow a different count of days, they will lose track of the appointed times and stumble in their worship. To change the calendar in this telling is to ignore what is already written on the tablets of heaven, to live as though the lines on those shining pages could be smudged or rewritten by human hands. You may have felt, in quieter moments of your own life, a desire for this kind of assurance. When plans fall apart, when seasons change without warning, when a year unfolds in ways you never expected, there can be a hidden fear that time is slipping beyond any kind of meaning. The Book of Jubilees speaks softly against that fear. It whispers that, even when your calendar is full of crossings out and arrows, there exists another record, one you cannot see, in which your days are held together. In that record, nothing is wasted. Delays and detours are not blank spaces, but lines that were already there, waiting for you to walk them. The early communities who cherished this book took that comfort seriously. When they aligned their lives with the 364-day year, they believed they were aligning not only with a theory, but with the tablets themselves. Every time they observed a feast on the same weekday as the year before, they felt that they were stepping into a line already written. Every Sabbath kept according to this pattern was, for them, a small act of trust in the angel's voice, a way of saying, we believe that time has been given shape, and we wish to live in that shape. Lying here now, you are far from Sinai, far from that cloud of presence that wrapped the mountain like a garment. Yet you are not far from the need that drove those communities to hold their calendar so tightly. You, too, live in a world where events surprise you, where news arrives without warning, where a single day can overturn carefully made plans. To bring the image of heavenly tablets into your imagination is not to deny the pain of those surprises, but to place them against a larger backdrop. It is to breathe in and out and say, even if I do not know what tomorrow holds, I can rest in the belief that tomorrow is not unknown to God. As the angel in Jubilees dictates history, he does not erase human freedom or responsibility. The stories he tells are filled with choices, with faithfulness and failure, with people who accept or resist the path laid before them. In the same way, Believing that time is written does not turn you into a passive character in your own life. Instead, it can free you from the terror of thinking that everything depends on your fragile control. You are invited to walk with care, but also to sleep without fear, trusting that the one who numbers your days is wise and good. The hidden calendar, seen in this light, is less about enforcing a particular arithmetic and more about revealing a heart that pays attention to every moment. For the communities who copied Jubilees and preserved its vision, this angelic dictation was one of the reasons the book felt so weighty. It did not present itself as a mere commentary or reflection. It claimed heavenly origin, a voice from the presence of God describing not only commandments, but the structure of time itself. That claim, as we will see, would make later leaders cautious. For now, as you sink deeper into rest, simply hold the image of Moses listening in the cloud, an angel's words unfolding the story of ages, and tablets of light bearing the record of days. In the next chapter, we will follow these words down from the mountain into the halls where bishops and teachers began to decide which books would guide the public life of the church, and which would slowly be left in the quiet. There is another kind of mountain that shapes history, not of stone and cloud, but of shelves and scrolls. Long after Moses listened to an angel in mist on Sinai, other men sat in lamplit rooms, surrounded by rolled manuscripts, thinking not about how many days belong in a year, but about which books belong at the heart of the church. As you breathe slowly now, you can picture one of those rooms. The oil in the lamps burns with a soft hiss. A bishop leans over a table, his hand resting on parchment. Behind him, shelves hold Gospels, letters, psalms, and histories, copied again and again by patient hands, somewhere far away, in languages few of them can read. The Book of Jubilees waits, its voice about time growing fainter with each generation that passes it by. In the 2nd century, a bishop named Irenaeus wrote to defend what he called the rule of faith. He lived in a time when many Gospels and Revelations were circulating, some faithful to the story of Jesus, others bending it into shapes that felt strange and brittle. Irenaeus wanted ordinary believers to know which voices they could trust, which writings carried the sound of the apostles. So he gathered testimonies, quoted from the 4 Gospels that would later stand at the heart of the New Testament, and argued that the church must measure every teaching against the pattern it had received. In his lists and arguments, you can hear the beginnings of a canon, a set of books that will be read aloud in worship until they feel like the very texture of Christian time. As you rest, you might imagine him lifting different texts, weighing them not on iron scales but in the balance of memory and doctrine. Here is the Gospel of Matthew, echoing prophecies and the words of the Lord. Here is a letter of Paul, full of correction and comfort. Here is a psalm that has already shaped the prayers of thousands. And here, somewhere off to the side, perhaps never reaching his table at all, is a scroll like the Book of Jubilees, beloved in some communities but already distant from the mainstream of Greek and Latin churches. It speaks of a 364-day year, of heavenly tablets and angelic calendars. For those listening to Irenaeus, the urgent task is to hold fast to the story of Christ in a sea of competing claims. Calendar disputes sink beneath more pressing waves. 2 centuries later, the work of drawing lines continued. In the 4th century, the church lived in a different world. Persecution had eased in much of the empire. Councils had gathered to confess the mystery of Father, Son, and Spirit, and the people who copied books now did so with new freedom. In this time, another bishop, Athanasius of Alexandria, wrote what became a famous letter to his flock, listing the books he believed should be received as the core of the New Testament. In that festal letter, he named the 27 writings many Christians know today. And he also spoke of other texts that might be read for instruction, and still others that he urged his people to avoid, lest they be confused or misled. The tone of such letters is careful and pastoral, like a shepherd steering a flock away from steep edges and towards safe pasture. Athanasius did not mention every book known in his day, nor did he need to condemn them all by name. It was enough to name the writings to be used publicly, to encourage other churches to copy the same scrolls and to place them in the hands of the faithful. In that slow and human process, some voices grew louder, while others faded into a gentle background. The Book of Jubilees, never fully woven into the Greek-speaking church, remained mostly on the margins, preserved in the highlands of Ethiopia, echoed in quotations and fragments, but not proclaimed week after week in the liturgy by the sea. As you lie here, you can feel both the comfort and the cost of this narrowing. There is deep relief in knowing that the central story has been carefully tended, that the Gospels, the letters, the Psalms and prophets have been guarded by generations who loved them. At the same time, you can sense how easy it was for a book like Jubilees to slip out of sight, not through a single harsh decree, but through quieter patterns of neglect. If a book is rarely copied, if it is not read aloud in worship, if its calendar no longer matches the way most believers mark their feasts, it will slowly fade from everyday awareness, even if no one publicly shouts its condemnation. If you think of all this in terms of sound, the process feels almost musical. Certain songs were chosen to be sung every week, and over time they became the shared soundtrack of Christian memory. Other melodies, once dear to smaller groups, were sung less and less, until only a few voices remembered them. Jubilees was one of those melodies. Its strong notes about a fixed solar calendar, about heavenly tablets and ordered jubilees, no longer fit easily into the liturgical rhythm of churches that followed another count of days. So its song drifted toward the edges, carried softly in Ethiopic tradition and hinted at in scattered references, while the main theme of Scripture continued to sound with clarity for most of the world. As your body grows heavier against the bed, you can hold all of this without anxiety. The forming of the canon was not a simple act of suppression, nor was it a perfect mechanical act. It was a long story of discernment, debate, prayer, and sometimes omission. The result gave the church a stable center, a trusted collection of writings that could be read and reread until they shaped hearts and habits. But it also meant that some texts, like the Book of Jubilees, would live on mostly at the edges, waiting for a different age to discover them again in caves, monasteries, and the quiet work of scholars. In the next chapter, we will leave the council halls and letter-writing desks and turn our gaze back to the sands of Egypt, where another buried library, the collection at Nag Hammadi, would one day be unearthed, reminding the modern world how many voices once spoke around the central story of the faith. Far from the cliffs of the Dead Sea, the desert keeps another secret. If you let your mind drift across maps as you lie here, you can travel from those Judean caves eastward in imagination, then south along the spine of ancient trade routes, until you reach the soft, pale sands along the Nile in Upper Egypt. There, not so long ago in the measure of history, a different group of jars waited in the earth, sealed and silent. A few villagers digging for fertilizer near the town of Nag Hammadi struck something hard, and like the shepherd at Qumran, They heard the brittle sound of pottery breaking, a small echo that would one day reach libraries all over the world. When those first jars were opened, the people who found them did not know what they had uncovered. The papyrus codices inside seemed old but fragile, their pages bound together rather than rolled. Others passed from hand to hand, traded and hidden, until scholars finally realized their importance. As experts leaned over those pages in quiet rooms, they saw that this collection contained gospels and revelations very different from the ones read each week in churches. The Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Truth, writings that spoke of secret sayings and inner knowledge, all written in Coptic, all buried together in clay like a time capsule from the 4th century. As you breathe in and out, you can picture those codices resting for more than 1,500 years in the dark. Sand pressed down from above. Seasons came and went. Empires rose and fell. The prayers of monks, merchants, and peasants drifted past on the air, unaware that beneath their feet lay a stack of books that once shaped the thought of small circles of believers. When the jars were sealed, someone chose to hide those writings, perhaps to protect them, perhaps to remove them from sight. Whatever the reason, the effect was the same. For long ages, the voices in those pages went quiet, while the canon named by bishops like Athanasius grew ever more familiar and central. Nag Hammadi is not about calendars. Most of the texts in that library speak of the soul, of creation, of salvation, in ways that sometimes run alongside and sometimes strain against the faith that the wider church recognized as sound. Yet for our journey tonight, these buried codices carry a gentle lesson. They show us how easily whole ways of telling the story of God and the world can be wrapped, hidden, and forgotten, even while the central proclamation of Christ continues unharmed. The discovery of the Nag Hammadi library did not erase the Gospels or overthrow the Creed. If you think back to the Dead Sea Scrolls, you can feel a soft resonance between the two discoveries. In both cases, jars in the earth held writings that had slipped out of everyday memory. In both cases, simple acts of digging and searching brought them back into the light at just the moment when modern scholarship had the tools to read, date, and preserve them. The scrolls by the Dead Sea revealed a community devoted to a strict solar calendar and a sharp critique of those who changed the times. The codices at Nag Hammadi revealed communities fascinated by hidden knowledge and inner revelation. As you rest, it may comfort you to know that truth does not tremble when hidden books are found. The faith that has carried countless souls through joy and sorrow does not hang on a single manuscript jar. When the Nag Hammadi texts were published, some readers felt a flicker of fear, as though these writings might overturn what they had trusted. Over time, that fear settled into a quieter understanding. The core of Christian confession remained intact, while around it, historians now saw a richer, more complicated landscape of early belief and speculation. In that widened view, a book like Jubilees finds its place, not as an enemy of faith, but as one of many ancient attempts to hear and describe the ways of God. The pattern that emerges is gentle but clear. Again and again, we discover that our present view of the past is partial. Scrolls in caves, codices in jars, fragments in the sands of Egypt or the vaults of monasteries, all remind us that what we see at any moment is only part of the library. Some books were copied often and so survived in many languages. Others were copied rarely and slipped into obscurity. Some were buried on purpose. Others were simply left on forgotten shelves until time and damp destroyed them. Through it all, the central testimony of Scripture remained. like a well-used path through a forest whose edges we are only now beginning to explore in detail. Lying here, you can let that image turn into a kind of peace. You do not need to fear new discoveries, nor do you need to chase every fragment as though it held a secret that will undo everything you have believed. Instead, you can receive these finds as a deepening of the backdrop, a soft expansion of the world in which the familiar stories took shape. Nag Hammadi, with its hidden gospels and treatises, shows us how ideas can be preserved beneath the sand for centuries. Qumran, with its scrolls, shows us how calendars and laws can sleep in caves. The Book of Jubilees stands somewhere in the weave between them, a text partly preserved, partly forgotten. Now read again in the glow of desk lamps and computer screens. As your breathing slows, imagine all these buried libraries as stars scattered behind the brighter constellations you already know. The canonical scriptures are like the clear shapes you can easily trace in the night sky. The apocryphal and rediscovered texts are like fainter points of light around them. Interesting and sometimes beautiful, but not the guides by which most travelers steer their course. To see them does not erase the constellations. It simply reveals that the sky is even wider than you thought. The hidden calendar of 364 days belongs to that wider pattern, a particular glimmer among many. In the next chapter, we will follow its light back to one of its brightest companions, the Book of Enoch, where another ancient voice watches the paths of the sun and warns of times corrupted, pointing us again to a vision of days ordered in heaven before they unfold on earth. Somewhere in the deep night of your imagination, a lone figure stands beneath a sky unbroken by city lights. His name is Enoch, the one Scripture remembers in a single brief line as a man who walked with God and was not, for God took him. In the Ethiopian Book of Enoch, that single line blooms into a great unfolding journey. Enoch becomes not only a walker with God, but a watcher of the heavens, a careful observer of the sun and stars, a scribe who learns to read the calendar written across the firmament. As you lie here, eyes closed, you can picture him craning his neck toward a canopy of countless lights, counting their risings and settings the way others might count their steps. In one part of that book, often called the astronomical book, Enoch is guided by an angel to see the portals of the sun. He is shown where the sun rises at different times of the year, how it moves along the horizon from one gate to another, and how it returns, again and again, in a steady cycle. The angel explains that this cycle, properly understood, produces a year of 364 days, with seasons and weeks that never drift. Enoch is told that this is the pattern appointed by the Most High, a pattern that matches what we have already heard in the pages of Jubilees. He is warned that if people follow the wrong count of days, they will corrupt the feasts, confuse the seasons, and fall out of step with the order of heaven. Let your breathing settle into a slow rhythm as you imagine those instructions. Enoch is taken from gate to gate along the horizon, the angel pointing with a hand of light. Here, the sun rises at the beginning of the year. Here, it will rise when spring is full. Here, at another gate, the days will begin to shorten. Each position, each change, is marked and measured. The year, in this vision, is like a great wheel turning under the watchful eyes of angels. 364 spokes radiate from its center, and on each of them a day rests, secure and known. Enoch listens, counts, writes, and the numbers settle into him like a lullaby of light and shadow. The astronomical book does not treat this as a mere curiosity. It speaks with sorrow about those who neglect the solar path and follow only the moon, letting months swell and shrink until the festivals wander off their appointed places. It says that sinners will err in counting the months, that they will observe feasts at the wrong times, and that this error will be a sign of disobedience. In the quiet of your room, that might sound distant and abstract, but beneath the surface you can feel the same longing that we have traced in Jubilees and in the scrolls of Qumran. It is a longing for a world in which sacred things do not slide out of their frames, in which the rhythm of worship is as steady as the rising of the sun. The Book of Giants, fragments of which were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, adds another shadowed layer to this picture. In that work, the great and terrible offspring of the Watchers, the giants born of heaven and earth, dream troubling dreams of their own downfall. Enoch is summoned as an interpreter. The text is broken in many places, but through its jagged edges you can hear themes that resonate with Jubilees and Enoch's other visions. The arrogance of those who ignore divine boundaries, the violence that follows when heavenly knowledge is twisted for selfish ends, the certainty that judgment will eventually restore a disturbed creation. Among the forbidden teachings of the fallen Watchers, the misuse of heavenly knowledge, including the perversion of times and seasons, stands as a sign that they have broken faith with the order God intended. As you rest, imagine those giants as symbols of what happens when immense power forgets its place in the pattern. They stride through the world without regard for measure, devouring, building, tearing down, until their presence deranges the balance of things. In the minds of the authors who wrote about them, this lawlessness is not only moral, but temporal. When times are corrupted, when festivals are shifted and weeks miscounted, it is as though the very heartbeat of creation is thrown off. Enoch, standing under the stars, becomes the opposite of these giants. He is not a breaker of boundaries, but a keeper of them. A human being whose greatness lies in his willingness to listen, to walk, and to observe the path of the sun with reverent care. The community at Qumran, whose scrolls we visited in the caves above the Dead Sea, placed Enoch alongside Jubilees in their library. They copied Enoch's visions, including the astronomical sections, and wove his language about watchers, judgment, and corrupted times into their own writings. When they kept their 364-day year, they did so with Enoch's warnings in their ears. For them, the solar path was not an isolated doctrine, but part of a larger tapestry, a belief that God had revealed not only laws but patterns, not only commandments but the architecture of time itself. To obey was to live inside that architecture. Lying here, you may feel a quiet resonance with that image, even if you never think about how many days belong in a year. There are times when your own life feels like a scattering of moments, appointments, and alarms, a jumble of notifications on a small, glowing screen. The Enochic vision offers a different picture. It invites you to imagine that, above the confusion of your daily schedule, there is a simpler, steadier movement. Sunrise, sunset, seasons turning with patient grace. You may not follow a 364-day calendar, but you can still let your heart rest in the thought that, behind the shifting surfaces, there is a stable rhythm you did not create and do not need to control. For the early communities who read Enoch and Jubilees together, this rhythm felt threatened by alternative calendars and teachings. Their language about those who change the times is sharp because their devotion is deep. Later generations, faced with the task of gathering a canon and shepherding many kinds of believers, were wary of such intensity. Books that linked faithfulness so tightly to a specific pattern of days could seem dangerous, especially when other faithful communities followed a different rhythm. It is not hard to see how, over centuries, writings like the Astronomical Book and Jubilees, with their fierce commitment to a solar year, would be set aside quietly while the Church turned its attention to other questions. For tonight, though, you do not need to take sides in those ancient disputes. You can simply watch, in your mind's eye, as Enoch traces the path of the sun, as giants dream of their fall, as scrolls in caves and highland monasteries guard their fragile pages, all of them, in their own ways, circle around the same assurance that time is not random, that seasons are known, that there is a wisdom bigger than our hurried counting. In the next chapter, we will leave these earliest visions and move much closer to our own age, listening to another once-lost text, the Gospel of Judas, as it steps out of a broken codex in 2006, reminding the modern world again that hidden books can still appear and unsettle our sense of how many voices once spoke around the central story of Christ. In another quiet room, many centuries after the caves of Qumran and the sands of Nag Hammadi gave up their secrets, a different set of fragile pages lay before a team of restorers. The year was 2006. On the table lay a crumbling codex that had passed through dealers and collectors, stored in a safety deposit box, sometimes mishandled, sometimes forgotten. Its leather was cracked, its pages were torn and stained, edges eaten by time. Yet as the sheets were gently separated and pieced together, letters slowly emerged from the damage, and with them the name of a figure everyone knew but few had ever heard in any other story. Judas, the Gospel of Judas, as this text came to be called, had long existed only as a shadow. Irenaeus mentioned it in the 2nd century when warning his readers about certain teachers, but for generations no one had a copy. It was a ghost in the footnotes of history, a title without pages. Now the battered codex that had slept in Egyptian soil yielded its contents. In this gospel, Judas is not simply the betrayer. He is drawn as a strange confidant of Jesus, privy to private sayings and cast in a light very different from the portrait that shines on him in the New Testament, accounts read in churches each week. In the first rush of excitement, some voices spoke as though the answer to every question might suddenly be yes. Articles spoke of a gospel that could redeem Judas, that could overturn tradition. But as scholars worked slowly through the Coptic lines, compared them with what writers like Irenaeus had said, and set the text among other 2nd century writings, a calmer picture emerged. The Gospel of Judas became a window into one particular stream of early thought, a reflection of groups who imagined creation and salvation in ways that did not match the faith of the wider church. It was important for historians and striking in its portrait of Judas. Yet it did not erase or replace the 4 Gospels that had stood at the heart of Christian proclamation for so long. As your breathing grows deeper, you can feel a familiar reassurance. Discoveries like the Gospel of Judas, the codices at Nag Hammadi, or the scrolls at Qumran do not unmake the road you already know. They show that there were side paths, small trails branching away into thickets of speculation and experiment. Some of those trails were thoughtful, some tangled, many eventually fading from use. The central road, the canon recognized by the Church, continued to carry the weight of worship and teaching, while these other texts fell silent until a later age. Curious and patient, came searching with brushes and magnifying lenses. For our question about the hidden calendar of 364 days, Judas has little to say directly. His gospel does not lay out a year of fixed feasts or speak of heavenly tablets and angelic schedules. Yet by appearing when it did, in a codex slowly restored, it reminded the world of something crucial for our story. The library of early Christianity was larger than most people imagined. The books later called apocryphal, gnostic, or heretical were not always the products of malice. Often, they were earnest attempts to understand Christ, to read Scripture, to wrestle with suffering and hope that simply did not line up with the faith the wider church discerned as true. Lying here. You can let that thought loosen some of the tension that rises when people hear of banned or forbidden books. Many of these writings were not destroyed in great fires or erased by dramatic decrees. They were, more often, quietly left uncopied. Monks and scribes spent their labor and ink on the texts that nourished their communities, while others, lacking that constant attention, crumbled at the edges of deserts or slept in forgotten chests. The Book of Jubilees followed a path something like this. It was cherished in the Ethiopian church, copied in the highlands while being neglected elsewhere. Its calendar and angelic stories woven into that tradition even as they disappeared from daily life across the sea. The reappearance of the Gospel of Judas placed it alongside other rediscovered works in the public imagination. For a time, headlines spoke of lost Gospels and secret scriptures. In that swirl of excitement, scholars had a chance to explain again what the canon is and is not. Recognizing a set of books as scripture does not mean pretending others never existed. It means trusting that, through a long history of reading, praying, arguing, and discerning, the church learned which writings carried the voice that led people deeper into Christ, and which writings, however fascinating, led them in circles or away from the center of the story. If you think of this process, it begins to sound very much like what we have already seen with calendars. Communities choose a rhythm to live by. They decide which pattern of days or which set of books will shape their shared life. Over time, that pattern becomes normal, expected, comforting. Other ways of counting, other collections of texts, may continue in smaller circles, but they no longer set the pace for the whole. The discovery of a lost calendar or a lost gospel can feel shocking at first, as though the ground were shifting. Yet, when the first tremor passes, what remains is a fuller picture of the past, and, often, a deeper appreciation for the wisdom and limits of those who came before us. For the listener drifting towards sleep, the story of the Gospel of Judas becomes a kind of parable. Here is a book that vanished, was whispered about by a bishop in the 2nd century, then reappeared in fragile form in our own generation. It changed the way historians understand certain groups in early Christianity. It added detail to the map of ancient belief, but it did not rewrite the center of the faith. Nor did it overthrow the trust that countless quiet souls have placed in the Gospels heard since childhood. In the same way, the hidden calendar of the Book of Jubilees, once lost and now studied again, adds depth and texture to our understanding of how some believers once lived their year. Without demanding that you abandon the rhythms that currently hold your days. As your eyes grow heavier, imagine the broken codex of Judas resting now, not in a dusty box, but in a carefully controlled archive. Its pages flattened, preserved, and digitized. Scholars scroll through images of its Coptic lines on glowing screens. They annotate, translate, and publish. Its voice, once silent, is heard again. Not to replace the familiar story, but to remind us how wide the early conversation around Christ and Scripture really was. As you breathe in and out, Let this knowledge settle softly over you, like a blanket of quiet assurance around your thoughts and your sleep. In the next chapter, we will leave the figure of Judas and return to the year itself, stepping into the feasts and appointed times as jubilees, and the Qumran calendar envisioned them, so that you can feel, from within, what it meant to live a life where holy days never drifted, and every festival returned like a star to the same point in the sky. There is a quiet comfort in knowing that something precious will always arrive on the same day. For the communities who walked inside the hidden calendar of 364 days, the feasts of the Lord worked like this: Passover, unleavened bread, first fruits, the Feast of Weeks, and the other appointed times did not wander from weekday to weekday. They returned like familiar footsteps on the same stone, year after year. As you breathe slowly now, you can imagine the peace that came from living in a world where holy days never slipped from their place. In the Book of Jubilees, and in the scrolls from Qumran, the year begins on a chosen weekday, and from that anchor, every festival unfolds with gentle precision. Passover always falls on the same evening of the same day. The Feast of Weeks is counted forward by fixed weeks, not by uncertain sightings of the moon, but by the steady march of Sabbaths. When a child in such a community asked, "When will we keep the feast this year?" the answer was simple: on the same day as last year, on the same day as the year before, on the same day your grandparents kept it, and their grandparents before them. Imagine being that child. The year is like a circle hung with lamps that never change their hooks. You fall asleep on the eve of a feast, knowing how the next day will feel. You know when the family will gather, when bread will be baked, when psalms will float through the house in the cool of evening. The adults may still worry about harvests or rumors from distant cities. Yet beneath all of that, one thing remains settled. Holy time holds still. As you rest now, you might feel a faint echo of that desire in yourself. A wish that certain days in your own life would stand firm like that, untouched by the storms of change. For the writers who defended the 364-day year, drifting feasts were more than an inconvenience. They were a sign of unfaithfulness. In their texts, they speak of leaders who follow a different reckoning of months, letting festivals wander until they are observed on days that, to the solar calendar keepers, are wrong. They fear that people will eat the Passover on a day not written on the heavenly tablets, that they will offer first fruits out of season. Such mistakes break the harmony between Israel and the angels, between earthly worship and the liturgy of heaven. The hidden calendar is their way of repairing that harmony, of making sure that when they stand to pray, they do so on days that the sun itself confirms. You may recognize a softer version of this concern in your own heart. When your inner calendar is scattered, when days blur and nights stretch too long, it can feel as though you have lost track of what matters and when it matters. Even if you do not keep feasts in the ancient sense, you may still hunger for recurring moments that call you back to God and to yourself. A weekly day of rest, a regular hour of quiet, an annual retreat or remembrance. These can become small feasts that do not drift, anchors that keep your soul from feeling tossed by constant demand. Read this way. The Book of Jubilees becomes an old friend, not arguing over arithmetic, but whispering that time itself can be shaped into a vessel of grace. In the Qumran community, devotion to fixed feasts blended with a sense of being set apart. Those who followed the hidden calendar saw themselves as a faithful remnant in a world that had chosen another rhythm. Every Passover kept on their chosen day. Every feast of weeks that rose on the same weekday as the year before. became an act of quiet resistance. They were saying with their calendars what others said with creeds. We will live by the pattern we have been shown, even if most around us do not. You may have known something like this on a smaller scale. Perhaps you have chosen a rhythm of prayer, or a way of guarding one evening each week. That seems strange to others. Friends may not understand why you put your phone away at the same hour, or why you treat a certain day as different from the rest. Yet, for you, those choices become feasts that do not drift. Sanctuaries in time, where you remember who you are and whose you are. In that sense, the hidden calendar is less about exact numbers and more about a posture of heart. A willingness to carve out recurring spaces in which you meet God and let His peace settle into your breathing. For the ancient keepers of the 364-day year, this posture expressed itself in careful tables and precise counting. For you, it may simply take the shape of nights like this, when you return to a story at a familiar hour and let its slow cadence guide you toward rest. If you make such times a habit, you are, in your own way, building a pattern of days that carry blessing. Small appointed times that your body and soul will learn to anticipate. The dates may not match those of Jubilees, yet the desire is the same. To let time become a friend rather than an enemy. A gentle river that carries you instead of a flood that overwhelms. As we understand how these communities lived, their unchanging feasts, it becomes easier to see why a book like Jubilees could be cherished by some and sidelined by others. For those who followed a different calendar, the insistence that only one pattern was faithful could feel like a judgment on their entire way of life. Over generations, that tension helped the book drift toward the edges of the wider church, even as it remained bright in the Ethiopian tradition. Before we follow that fading more closely, we will step back from dates and festivals to listen to a deeper theme within Jubilees. The claim that human lives themselves are written in weeks and jubilees on heavenly tablets. In the next chapter, we will hear how this vision speaks not only of feasts that never drift, but of your own days, inscribed and remembered in ways that can comfort you as you drift into sleep. There is a tenderness in the way the Book of Jubilees speaks about time that goes beyond dates and feasts. It does not only measure years and seasons, it imagines your life and the lives of all who have ever walked the earth, as resting on those heavenly tablets where weeks and jubilees are carefully written. As you lie here with your eyes heavy, you can picture those tablets again, not as cold stone, but as pages of living light. On them, not only the great events of history are inscribed, but the quieter spans of days that make up a single human story. In this vision, you are not a stray moment drifting through a meaningless calendar. You are a person whose days are noticed, counted, and held. Jubilees often pauses to tell us exactly how many years passed between events, how many weeks of years lay between a covenant and its renewal, how many jubilees had unfolded before a promise was fulfilled. To a modern reader, those numbers can feel like excess detail, but to the communities who cherished this book, they were a way of saying that God does not lose track of time. If He remembers that a promise was given in a particular year of a particular jubilee, then He also remembers the long, ordinary days in which people waited for that promise to come true. The arithmetic of jubilees is not just for scholars. It is a way of assuring weary hearts that waiting is never invisible. As your breathing settles into a slow pattern, you might think of your own life as a sequence of sacred weeks. There were weeks of childhood, when time seemed to stretch wide and loose. There were weeks of work or study, when days blurred together, each one filled with small tasks and unremarkable conversations. There may have been weeks of grief that felt longer than years, and weeks of joy that seemed to vanish too quickly. In the imagination of Jubilees, all these weeks are written somewhere, not as data in a machine, but as lines in a story that God has been following with unbroken attention. The idea of heavenly tablets can sound distant or abstract, yet if you sit with it in the quiet, it begins to feel surprisingly intimate. To say that your days are written is to say that nothing in them is overlooked. The mornings when you woke up anxious and the nights when you finally slept. The moments when you were kind and the moments when you failed. All of them pass across the awareness of the one who made you. He does not count them to condemn you, but to show that your life, in all its unevenness, still fits inside his faithful remembrance. Even the days that felt wasted to you can be imagined as lines that have not been torn from the page. This way of seeing time stands in contrast to the way many of us experience it. In a world of crowded schedules and glowing screens, it is easy to feel that you are always running behind, dragged forward by deadlines and alerts. Days can feel interchangeable, an endless series of obligations. The hidden calendar of Jubilees offers a softer picture. It suggests that time is structured not by urgency but by blessing. Weeks are not simply units of productivity. They are sacred frames in which love, growth, independence, and rest can occur. To live inside sacred weeks is to begin to treat your days as gifts rather than as mere fuel for achievements. The communities who love Jubilees took this seriously enough to shape their identity around it. They believed not only that feasts must never drift, but that generations themselves move according to a divinely measured rhythm. Certain ages of history are marked off as times of faithfulness or corruption, of wandering or restoration. This can sound heavy, but there is a gentler side. It means that when you find yourself living through a difficult season, you can imagine that it, too, is part of a larger chapter, one that has a beginning and an end. Just as the year is divided into 4 quarters, so a life can be thought of in phases that each carry their own kind of grace. For you, lying in the dark, this perspective can become a source of rest. If your days are written and your weeks are sacred, then you do not need to solve everything tonight. You can allow this day to end, knowing that it takes its place among many others. You can let tomorrow arrive in its own time, trusting that it will be met with the same quiet attention from heaven. The hidden calendar reminds you that God is not startled by your fatigue, your confusion, or your smallness. He has already measured the span of your life and chosen to walk through it with you. Not from a distance, but with a care that reaches down into hours and minutes. In this light, the 364-day year becomes less an argument and more an icon. It represents a world in which everything has its place. A world where feasts and fasts, work and rest, joy and sorrow, are all gathered into a pattern that leads somewhere. You may not keep that exact year, but you can let the image of it soothe you. Imagine your own calendar gently rearranged, not with new dates, but with new meaning. Each week bears the possibility of encounter. Each season holds room for healing. Each year, however ordinary, joins a long chain of years in which God has remained faithful. As your body sinks deeper into stillness, you can hold one simple thought from all of this. You are living inside sacred weeks. Even when you feel rushed or lost, your days are not falling into emptiness. They are being carried, recorded, remembered. In the next chapter, we will turn from the inner comfort of this vision to the restless pace of our modern time. And we will listen for the ways the hidden calendar can speak into a world of flickering screens and constant haste. offering you a gentler rhythm to breathe by as you move through the days ahead. In the glow of your room, a small rectangle of light keeps time for you. Numbers change in the corner of a screen. Notifications rise and fall like tiny waves against the edge of your attention. Our age is full of clocks, yet strangely empty of rest. Even when the hands on the dial pause, the mind keeps ticking, counting worries instead of hours. As you lie here, you may feel that restlessness in your own body, a soft tension between the desire to sleep and the habit of staying alert. The world of the Book of Jubilees knew nothing of digital calendars or endless scrolling. Yet its authors understood a kind of restlessness that sounds familiar. They looked at communities who kept their years by shifting moons, at feasts that drifted, at seasons that no longer lined up with what they believed was written on heavenly tablets. And they saw in that drift a symptom of a deeper unease. When the year will not hold still, when holy days wander, the soul can feel as though it has lost its landmarks. Birthdays, deadlines, holidays, sailors, launch dates, news cycles, all crowd into the same limited span of days. In such a climate, it is easy to forget that time was ever meant to be a covenant rather than a competition. We wake to a chorus of prompts, move from one task to another, and sometimes collapse at night, with the quiet sense that we have been chasing the day instead of walking in it. The hidden calendar of 364 days speaks softly into this chase. It does not ask you to adopt its exact pattern of quarters and weeks, but it offers a picture of time as something ordered from above rather than driven from below. In its world, feasts do not shout for attention. They arrive on schedule, like long, expected guests, and the people receive them not as interruptions, but as blessings. As your breathing slows, you can imagine what it would feel like to live in that posture, even if you never change the numbers on your calendar. Instead of thinking of time as an enemy that steals your energy, you might begin to think of it as a river that carries you at a gentle pace. There is work along its banks, yes, and moments of urgency when rapids appear. But the overall flow is guided by a hand greater than your own. The 364-day year becomes, in this sense, a symbol of trust. Its unchanging weeks and feasts tell the anxious heart, you do not have to make everything happen. Some things will return on their own, at the appointed time. The modern soul often feels torn between two impulses. One is the desire to seize every opportunity, to say yes to each invitation, to pack the calendar so full that there is no room left to breathe. The other is the desire to withdraw completely, to turn off all alerts, to escape from the demands that never seem to end. Neither extreme brings lasting peace. The hidden calendar suggests a third way. It shows a life in which certain times are set apart in advance, not by impulse, but by intention. Work has its place. Rest has its place. Worship has its place. When those places are honored, the spaces between them become less chaotic. You can begin to taste this even now, simply by noticing the rhythm of your body. Your lungs are not rushing. Your heart, unless you are frightened, is not racing to meet a deadline. It beats at a steady pace, wave after wave of blood carrying life through your veins. In a similar way, you can imagine arranging your days so that they imitate that heartbeat. Times of effort, times of stillness, times of gathering, times of solitude, each returning in a pattern you come to know. You may not count them in Jubilees, but you can still let them be sacred. The message of Jubilees, read in this light, is that time becomes holy not only in grand festivals, but whenever it is received as a gift rather than as a burden. The discovery of texts like Jubilees, Enoch, and the Qumran calendars in the last century happened at a moment when modern life was accelerating. Cars and planes shrank distances and compressed hours. We can cross oceans in less than a day, speak across continents in an instant, and fill every spare moment with sound. Yet the human heart has not changed its deepest needs. It still longs for a sense that its days are not random. It still needs intervals of quiet in which to remember that it is more than its output. The ancient insistence on fixed feasts can sound strange until you realize that it answered the same need you feel now. The need for recurring openings in the fabric of time where God can be met and where you can simply be. As you rest, you might choose to let one small practice rise from this reflection. Perhaps you set aside a regular evening each week when you dim the lights, silence the devices, and listen to something that lifts your thoughts toward God. Perhaps you mark one simple act, like a walk at the same hour or a brief prayer said each night before you sleep, as a kind of modern feast that does not drift. These gestures may seem small, yet over weeks and months they form a pattern. A quiet calendar, written not on parchment, but on your habits. In that pattern, anxious days can begin to soften. The hidden calendar will probably never govern the civil year again. Most of the world will continue to mark its time by other counts, its holidays by other rules. Yet the heart of its message can still reach across the centuries to where you lie now. It whispers that time is not merely the sum of your deadlines, that your life is not measured only in productivity or noise. It invites you to inhabit your days as though they were spaces prepared for you, not traps set against you. In the next chapter, we will listen more closely to how Jubilees and its kindred texts speak of corrupted times and the hope of restoration. And we will see how even their warnings can become a source of comfort, promising that the one who ordered the first week of creation will also heal the disorder in our own restless clocks. There are moments in every life when things feel out of joint, when days arrive that seem wrong somehow, as if an invisible schedule has been disturbed. The Book of Jubilees knows this feeling and pushes it outward onto the fabric of history. It speaks of generations who will not keep the appointed times, who will change the calendar, move the feasts, and forget the weeks and jubilees written on the heavenly tablets. For the authors of that book, corrupted time is not a small error. It is a sign that something deep in the relationship between heaven and earth has been strained. As you breathe slowly now, you may recognize that ache in the world around you, in news that never sleeps, and in a constant sense that everything important is happening all at once. In the warnings of Jubilees, the picture is stark. There will be people, it says, who follow the moon instead of the sun, who count months in ways that cause the festivals to drift. When they do this, the feasts will no longer fall on the days written on the tablets of heaven. Offerings will be made on the wrong dates. Sabbaths will be misaligned. What begins as a shift in arithmetic becomes, in their view, a symptom of forgetfulness. The people have lost the pattern that was given to them. And with that loss comes a dimming of awareness. They no longer know when to rejoice, when to repent, when to gather, when to rest. This language, echoing also in the Enochic writings and in the scrolls from Qumran, feeds into a wider stream of apocalyptic thought. Corrupted time is a marker of the last days, a sign that creation itself is groaning under misused power and neglected covenants. When the appointed times are forgotten, injustice multiplies, violence increases, and the proud seem to rule unchecked. For the communities who cherished these texts, the state of the calendar mirrored the state of the heart. A life that no longer honored set times of rest and worship was a life that had begun to drift from its center. A society that changed feasts for convenience had already started to live as though it were the master of its own story. As you rest in the dark, you may see reflections of this in your own surroundings. Even if no one you know is arguing over ancient dates, our clocks can be full and our souls still empty. Work spills into every evening. Messages demand attention at all hours. The small moments that once formed a rhythm of shared life, like meals eaten slowly or regular gatherings, are easily pushed aside by flashing reminders. In such a climate, time feels corrupted in another way. It is no longer a gift to be received, but a commodity to be spent, traded, and optimized. The warnings of Jubilees about moved feasts become, in this light, gentle metaphors for what happens when we stop making space for what is holy. When every day becomes the same busy blur, yet even in its sharpest passages, the hidden calendar carries hope. The very fact that Jubilees speaks of corrupted time means that it believes time can be healed. The text looks forward to a restoration in which the appointed times will again be kept correctly, when generations will return to the pattern written above, and when feasts will fall once more on their rightful days. The world may pass through seasons of confusion, but the underlying structure has not been destroyed. The tablets have not been erased. The sun still rises and sets according to the path appointed for it. Even when human schedules are chaotic, lying here, you can let that assurance seep slowly into your breathing. You do not have to fix the entire calendar of your culture to experience a measure of restored time in your own life. You can begin with simple acts that answer the spirit of these ancient texts. Even if you never count weeks exactly as they did, when you choose to truly rest for a day, to keep a small personal feast of gratitude, or to pause each evening in quiet prayer before sleep, you are pushing back gently against corrupted time. You are saying with your habits that hours and days are more than units of productivity. They are spaces in which you can meet the one who ordered the first week of creation. For the early readers of Jubilees, apocalyptic warning and everyday faithfulness were woven together. They could look at the world and see signs of disorder. Yet they did not respond only with fear. They responded by shaping their own lives according to the pattern they believed in, trusting that in doing so they aligned themselves with the future restoration God had promised. You can follow that same thread in a quieter way. Each time you honor a rhythm of work and rest. Each time you step away from noise to listen for God. You bear witness to a different way of inhabiting time, one that does not end in exhaustion but in peace. As you drift towards sleep, imagine that all the tangled schedules and restless clocks of your day are being gently set aside. You are stepping, for this moment, into a different order, one in which your worth is not measured by how much you have done, but by the simple fact that you are known and loved. The warnings of corrupted time become, in this stillness, invitations rather than threats. They invite you to loosen your grip on the hours, to trust that the one who wrote the first week on heavenly tablets is still guiding history toward a restored rhythm of justice and rest. In the next chapter, we will look more closely at how and why the calendar of Jubilees slipped into obscurity, tracing the quiet ways in which this fierce vision of ordered time was set aside, even as its deepest promise, that your days are held in a larger story, continued to shine in the faith of the Church. There is a special kind of forgetting that does not happen all at once. It happens quietly, over many years, as people choose one book more often than another, one custom instead of its rival. The story of the hidden calendar of 364 days is a story of this gentle forgetting. No council ever stood and thundered a decree that said, "You must never read the Book of Jubilees again." Instead, other rhythms slowly took center stage, and the fierce little Genesis that guarded its fixed year was left more and more at the edges. As you breathe in and out now, you can imagine that fading, not as a violent act, but as the slow dimming of a lamp in a room that no one visits anymore. In the world of Judaism, after the Second Temple fell, debates about the calendar did not vanish. They continued in the discussions that would be gathered into the Mishnah and the Talmud, in arguments over how to determine the new moon, how to adjust for the seasons, how to keep Passover at the right time while living under changing empires. The 364-day solar year of Jubilees and Qumran, however, did not win that argument. Rabbinic authorities embraced a carefully balanced lunar-solar calendar, one that used the moon but also adjusted for the sun. And over time, that pattern became normal in synagogues and homes scattered across the world. A calendar that once defined a desert sect slowly became the memory of a minority. As generations passed, the devotion of those who had kept the fixed solar year was preserved mainly in their writings. Scrolls lay in caves by the Dead Sea. Manuscripts lingered in monastic libraries in the highlands of Ethiopia. Ordinary worshippers, lighting Sabbath candles in Babylon or Rome or Spain, no longer heard. Teachers insist that there must be exactly 364 days in the year to be faithful. They learn to bless the new moon, to follow communal announcements, to trust that their leaders had reckoned the times. The hidden calendar did not disappear, but it no longer shaped the weekly conversations of most communities. It became one voice among many in the vast, layered symphony of tradition. Among Christians, another set of concerns further dimmed the light of Jubilees. As the church spread among Gentiles, questions about the exact timing of Israel's feasts intertwined with new debates over the observance of Sunday, the date of Easter, and the rhythm of the liturgical year. Bishops gathered to decide whether the great feast of the resurrection should be tied closely to Jewish Passover or set on a schedule of its own. Councils met. Letters were written, and formulas were devised to calculate Easter according to the spring equinox and the phases of the moon. In that swirl of concern, a book that insisted on a rigid solar year, largely outside the languages most churches now used, did not sit at the center of the table. It hovered instead in the background, known in some places, unknown in many others. The guardians of the canon, like Irenaeus and Athanasius, also played their part in this quiet burial. When they listed the books to be read publicly in churches, they did so with pastoral caution. Their aim was not to destroy every other writing, but to give the faithful a clear core of texts that would nourish belief and resist confusion. The Book of Jubilees, while respected in some early circles and echoed in quotations, never found a firm, shared place in those lists for the Greek and Latin churches. It was not copied as often as the Gospels or the letters of Paul. Scribes, working long hours with ink and parchment, naturally gave their energy to the texts their bishops most encouraged. A book that is copied less will eventually be seen less, and what is seen less is more easily forgotten. Yet, not everywhere did Jubilees fall silent. In the Ethiopian church, it was translated into Ge'ez and preserved as part of a wider collection of sacred writings that included Enoch and other works lost elsewhere. There, in highland monasteries and mountain liturgies, its voice remained alive. Priests and monks continued to read its stories of angels, patriarchs, and ordered time. For them, the hidden calendar was not a banned curiosity, but one thread in the tapestry of their faith. When modern scholars finally brought Ethiopic manuscripts to wider attention, they were, in a sense, listening in on a conversation that had never completely stopped, only continued in a language many outside had overlooked. As you lie here, it may help to think of all this not as a story of villains and victims, but as a story of choices and limits. No community can live by every book it inherits. People must decide which texts to copy, which to memorize, which to read aloud in worship and which to leave for private study. The 364-day calendar of Jubilees asked a great deal. It claimed heavenly authority for one precise rhythm of the year and implied that other rhythms were flawed. For communities that had already settled into different patterns, that claim could feel more divisive than helpful. So, gently, without dramatic condemnations, many simply turned their attention elsewhere, and so the calendar was buried, not in a single grave, but beneath layers of new habits. The world learned to keep time in other ways. Bells rang for Sunday services. Work weeks and school terms grew up around civil calendars. Nations adopted their own systems for marking holidays and years, yet somewhere beneath all of that, in caves and manuscripts and the memories of a few enduring traditions, the vision of a fixed solar year remained. Tonight, as you breathe and let these stories drift through your thoughts, you are touching that buried pattern again. In the next chapter, we will ask what it means for you now that this forgotten calendar has been found. Not so that you will tear up your diary and start again, but so that you can receive your own days as a gift from the one who has always counted them with care. Tonight you have walked a long, quiet road. You began with a strange book that most Bibles do not contain. A little Genesis that spoke of angels and heavenly tablets, and a year of 364 days. You passed through caves above the Dead Sea, where scrolls slept in jars, and along the Nile, where codices waited in clay. You listened to bishops with ink-stained fingers, deciding which books the church would carry in its hands from age to age. Through it all, one question has followed you like a soft refrain. What is this hidden calendar? Why did it fade? And what could it possibly mean for the way you inhabit your own days? The Book of Jubilees answered the first part gently but firmly. It told you that the hidden calendar is a solar year, divided into 4 equal quarters, 13 weeks in each, 52 weeks in all. It promised feasts that never drift, Sabbaths that never lose their place, and generations measured in jubilees that flow like terraces down the slope of history. In that vision, time is not a loose thread but a woven garment, stitched according to a pattern that began in the first week of creation. The 364 days are not just numbers, they are a symbol of a universe where nothing sacred slides out of its frame. You also saw why such a calendar could not easily remain at the center of every community's life. As Judaism gathered itself after the fall of the temple, it followed a different reckoning of months. As the church spread among many peoples, it wrestled more with questions of resurrection and grace than with exact counts of days. Bishops like Irenaeus and Athanasius chose, with careful love, which writings would be read aloud to nourish the faith of ordinary believers. And Jubilees, with its fierce solar arithmetic, was not among them. In some places, like the highlands of Ethiopia, it stayed bright. In others, it slipped quietly into the background. Its calendar carried more in fragments and echoes than in daily practice. Yet the fading of its specific year did not erase the heart of its message. That message has glimmered all along the path you have taken tonight. The Dead Sea Scrolls whispered it when they described priests keeping their courses according to a fixed pattern. The Book of Enoch sang it when it showed the sun passing through its gates with unerring loyalty. Even the rediscovery of the Gospel of Judas and the Nag Hammadi library, though different in content, reminded you that the early Christian world was wide and complicated, and that God's truth has continued steady even while many side paths were buried for a time. Behind all of this lies a quieter assurance. Your days are not random, they are seen. As you lie in the dimness of your room, you can let the hidden calendar detach itself from the debate over numbers and settle into you as an image. Picture your life as a year that does not drift. Not because every appointment goes as planned, but because every day, whether bright or difficult, falls into a story that God has not stopped telling. The heavenly tablets that Jubilees loves to describe can become, for you, a way of imagining that nothing about your journey is lost. The weeks when you felt strong and the weeks when you were barely holding on. The seasons that brought joy and the seasons that brought silence. All of them have a place. None of them has fallen out of his awareness. This does not mean you must suddenly change the way you mark your calendar. You do not need to adopt 364 days. Or calculate quarters and jubilees, to receive what the Book of Jubilees is offering at its deepest level. What it offers is a way of resting inside time instead of fighting it. It invites you to see the days as given rather than grabbed, to trust that there are appointed times in your life that will arrive whether you strain for them or not. Certain doors will open when their hour comes. Certain burdens will lift in seasons you cannot yet see. You are not required to anticipate, control, or accelerate everything. You can respond to this invitation in very small, concrete ways. Perhaps you choose one evening each week to be your own unchanging feast of quiet, a time when you dim the lights. Set work aside, and let your breathing slow as you listen for God in the stillness. Perhaps you mark the passing of months not only with tasks completed, but with moments of gratitude, however small, a conversation that mattered, a kindness received, a day when you felt unexpectedly held. Over time, such practices become a gentle calendar written on your heart. They do not match the hidden calendar of Jubilees in detail, but they carry its spirit, a desire to live in rhythm with grace rather than in constant reaction to pressure. If corrupted time is one of the shadows these ancient texts warned about, then your quiet choices toward rest, prayer, and remembrance are small acts of restoration. Each time you let a day end without condemning yourself for what you did not accomplish, you step a little closer to the world Jubilees longs for, where time is aligned once more with blessing. Each time you choose to be present in a moment instead of racing ahead in your thoughts, you answer the old anxiety that feasts might wander. You are, in your own way, letting holiness return to specific hours and specific days. Now, as the night folds more deeply around you, you can let the entire journey of this story gather into one simple truth. The hidden calendar was banned, buried, or forgotten in many places because it demanded a precise pattern that communities could not, or chose not to, carry forward. But the God whose order it tried to honor has not changed. He still numbers the hairs of your head. He still knows when you sit and when you rise. He still keeps count of your tears and your joys. You do not have to understand every mystery of ancient years to rest in that. You need only allow this moment, this breath, this night, to be part of his keeping. So allow your shoulders to loosen. Let your jaw soften. Feel the weight of your body supported. Hour, following hour, as gently as seasons follow one another in a year that does not need your effort to turn. The forgotten calendar has done its work tonight if it has helped you glimpse, even for a moment, that you are living in a story where time is cared for and where you are not alone. You can walk gently in God's time, trusting that He is patient with you, unhurried in His love, and faithful to every promise written over your days. The story of the hidden calendar has unfolded like a slow-turning year around you. We began with a book that most people never hear named aloud, the Book of Jubilees, and with a question that quietly tugged at the edges of your thoughts. If God truly cares for the shape of time, what does it mean that a book claiming to preserve His perfect year was buried, ignored, and set aside? Along the way you walked through caves above the Dead Sea, across sands that hid the Nag Hammadi library, and into quiet rooms where bishops and scholars weighed scrolls in the light of flickering lamps. You listened to Enoch trace the path of the sun, to Qumran's community defend its fixed feasts, and to the Ethiopian church quietly keep a book the rest of the world almost forgot. Now, here at the end of this night's journey, the question turns gently toward you. The 364-day calendar of Jubilees is, in one sense, an ancient debate. Its exact pattern no longer rules the life of most communities, but beneath its numbers lies a truth that still reaches you where you are lying now. That truth is simple and deep. Time is not an accident. Your days are not falling out of a broken clock. They are known, counted, and wrapped inside a larger story. Even when your own plans feel scattered and fragile, the hidden calendar was banned in many places, but the care it tried to honor has never gone away. As you breathe slowly, let yourself imagine once more those heavenly tablets that Jubilees loves to describe, not as cold slabs locked in some distant vault, but as shimmering pages that hold every week and season of your life. On them are written not only the grand events you remember easily, but the small, quiet days that seem to blend together. The days when you simply did what needed to be done. The days when you felt invisible. The days when you did not know what you were becoming. None of them have slipped through the cracks. Even if you cannot see the pattern, the one who holds those tablets can. You do not have to understand every ancient text to receive that comfort. You do not have to take sides in arguments between solar and lunar calendars, between one feast system and another. It is enough for tonight to let the image of a carefully ordered year gently loosen the knot of urgency in your chest. In the hidden calendar, feasts did not rush. They did not arrive too early or too late. They returned when their day came, faithful and unhurried. In the same way, there are things in your life that will arrive in their proper time, not when anxiety demands them, but when grace has prepared the way. Think of your own days as a kind of liturgy. There are hours of work and hours of rest, moments of speaking and moments of silence, seasons when you are called outward and seasons when you are drawn inward. If you can begin to receive them as appointed times, even when they do not look as you expected, you will be living the heart of what Jubilees longed for. You will be walking gently in God's time instead of running breathless through your own. The forgotten calendar becomes, in this sense, an icon for your soul, a reminder that you are invited to move with a holy rhythm rather than against it. Let us gather all of this into a quiet prayer. If you wish, you can repeat its sense in your heart as you listen. Lord of days and years, who measured the first week of creation and who numbers the hairs on my head, I place my time in your hands again tonight. You know the hours I have lived, the ones I wish I could change, the ones I treasure, and the ones I barely remember. You know the seasons that felt full of light and the seasons that felt like wandering in the dark. Take them all and weave them into the story you are telling. Teach me to see my days not as a burden to survive, but as a gift to receive. When I am restless, remind me that I do not have to control every moment. When I am afraid of the future, remind me that it is already known to you. When I feel that I am behind, that I have missed my chance, whisper to me that you are never late, that your appointments do not depend on my perfection. Give me courage to set aside times for rest and for you, feasts in my own small calendar that do not drift. Even when the world around me is noisy and hurried, let my heart learn a gentler rhythm, one that echoes your patience and your care. As these words settle into you, allow your body to follow. Feel your shoulders sink a little deeper into the bed. Let your jaw unclench. Your hands loosen. Your breathing lengthen. The day that is ending now has a place in the story. Whether or not you feel it, you do not need to fix it before you sleep. You are allowed to let it be written exactly as it was, trusting that the author who holds the tablets of time also holds your heart with the same steady attention. In the quiet that follows, you can imagine the lights of all those hidden libraries dimming one by one. The caves at Qumran grow still again. The jars at Nag Hammadi rest in their museums. The Ethiopian monasteries return to their night prayers. The books that shape tonight's journey close softly. Above them all, and above you, the same ancient sky stretches. Stars moving in patterns older than any calendar. The God who made that sky is watching over you now, not as a distant observer, but as someone who has promised to be with you always, even to the end of the age. Let that be enough. Let it be enough that your time is known, that your days are seen, that you are not walking through this year alone. The hidden calendar has done its work if it has helped you feel, even faintly, that you can rest inside a love that is not rushed, not anxious, not forgetful. You can close your eyes without fear that everything will fall apart when you are not awake to manage it. The one who neither slumbers nor sleeps is keeping watch. You are held. Your days are known. You can rest now.